His alpha stood before the entire pack and said it out loud.
You will never be my Luna.
Loud enough for the children to remember. Loud enough for the elders to look away in shame. She was cast out of Iron Hollow for one crime, being exactly who the moon goddess chose. What came after rewrote laws every pack in the Northern Territories had lived by for 200 years. So here's the question. When the darkness came for Iron Hollow, when his pack was bleeding in the snow, and she was the only one who could save it, would you have saved them? Or would you have let Iron Hollow burn? Before the rejection, before the words that could not be unsaid. There was a girl named Sera Voss. She had never needed anyone's permission to be exactly what she was. Born in the borderlands, not quite inside Iron Hollow's territory, not quite outside it. The elders said that made her neither prey nor predator. She thought that was the most useful thing anyone had ever told her. She had been running the ridge trail since she was 7. Before her wolf emerged, before she knew what packland felt like under her feet, she ran because the ridge didn't ask what she was worth before it let her cross. She met Cain Ashford at a territorial boundary summit. She was 22. He was the youngest Alpha Iron Hollow had ever produced. Took the title at 19. Held the territory through 3 hard winters on authority alone. No wars won, no rivals crushed. Just the quiet, complete weight of a man who made other wolves feel that chaos was not an option. She was standing at the edge of the summit fire when it happened. He stopped moving. That was the whole story, really. Cain Ashford, the alpha who had held Iron Hollow together through 3 winters without asking for help from anyone, stopped moving the moment she looked up from the fire. Every wolf at that summit felt it. The way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. The mate bond hit them both at the same instant. Rare, complete. The kind the old stories called a gift the moon goddess only gave to those strong enough to carry it. Their bonding ceremony was attended by 7 packs.
That bond is going to demand something enormous from both of them. The question is whether they will be ready when it does.
Nobody asked him what he meant. They should have. The early months were the kind that feel afterward, like they happen to a version of yourself that no longer exists. Sera learned the name of every wolf in Iron Hollow before the first month was finished. Not just names, she learned the texture of each life, who had lost someone in the border wars, who was carrying a grief they hadn't yet named, who needed to be seen before they could speak. Cain watched her, the way a man watches something that makes him feel, for the first time in a long time, that his life had been pointed toward a specific destination. And this was it. Then the prophecy came. Elder Soren, dawn, the solstice.
The mate the Alpha rejects will be the one his pack cannot survive without.
Cain heard it. He nodded. The way you nod at things you believe will never apply to you. He was wrong. They almost always are. The cold didn't arrive all at once. It never does. A draft under a door. A silence that lasts 1 beat too long. The particular shift in a room when certain people enter it. It started with Cain's inner council. 3 wolves. Dax, the war general. Petra, the territory strategist. Marcus, Cain's oldest advisor. They weren't cruel wolves. They were practical ones, which is sometimes more dangerous. The first time Sera noticed, she couldn't have named what she'd noticed. A meeting she always attended began without anyone sending word. She arrived to find the door already closed.
Short matter. Nothing requiring your presence.
She believed him. The second time, she didn't ask. It was Marcus she watched most carefully. He had welcomed her to Iron Hollow with the formal courtesy of a man who had mastered warmth without heat. Smiled at the right moments, deferred to her in public. But Sera had grown up in the borderlands, where you learn to read the distance between what is said and what is meant. And Marcus's smiles never reached the part of his eyes that made decisions. Elder Soren found her in the herb garden one morning, 2 months after the council meetings had started closing without her. He didn't sit. He stood at the garden gate, the way old wolves stand, when they're delivering something they'd rather not carry.
A Luna kept outside the war room is not a Luna. She is a display piece. Watch for when the display is moved.
She asked him what he meant. He walked away without answering. He had already told her everything she needed to know. It happened the way rot always moves in a pack, starting at the top, spreading downward through silence, not in a single act, not with any declaration, just a series of small adjustments, each one explainable on its own, together forming a shape that could only be read from a distance. Her seat at the pack table moved, one position to the left, still beside Cain, technically, but no longer at the place where decisions were passed and received. Nobody announced it. Someone set her place differently one morning, and nobody corrected it. Then her border patrol reports stopped arriving. She asked the patrol captain once. He'd been told to route them differently. He didn't say by whom, she didn't ask. Then the alliance meeting with Crescent Ridge, the one she had spent 3 weeks preparing, drafted the agenda for, corresponded with their elder personally, proceeded without her in the room. Cain said it had run long, said she would have found it tedious. She had never found diplomacy tedious in her life. He knew that. The pack noticed. Packs always notice. Before the Alpha does, before the Luna does, before anyone with the power to stop it has decided to look directly at it. Small requests that once came to Sera went instead to Petra. Courtesies were offered more tentatively, as though her status required ongoing assessment. She had become something the pack no longer knew how to classify. That is the most precise definition of erasure. Not hatred, not cruelty, simply reclassification. The rejection happened on the night of the Blood Moon gathering. Every wolf in Iron Hollow was present. The 7 allied packs had sent delegations. Elder Soren stood at the front of the great hall holding the ritual stone, the posture of a man performing a ceremony he did not believe should be happening. He had told Sera 3 days before that he needed to make an announcement, hadn't told her what. She had stood in their shared space and looked at him, the man who had stopped walking at a summit fire 2 years ago, and felt something in the room she could not name but could not stop feeling. He couldn't meet her eyes, she knew then, but knowing doesn't prepare you. He declared it in front of everyone, severed the mate bond, said she didn't carry the strength the pack required, said the moon goddess's choice had been made in error, said she would never be his Luna, used the old laws to make it irrevocable. The hall went absolutely silent. Not the silence of agreement, the silence of a room full of wolves who had stopped breathing at the same moment. Elder Soren set the ritual stone down on the altar table, slowly, deliberately. The sound of it was the only sound in the room. Then he turned and walked to the back of the hall without performing the ceremony. 40 years of service. He had never once refused a ritual request. He refused this one without a single word. It didn't stop what had already happened. The words had been spoken. Sera stood in that hall and looked at the man she had bonded with, the man whose pack she had learned by name and by grief and by birthday, and she did not cry. She had learned something in the borderlands that wolves raised inside pack territories rarely learn. Tears require an audience that has decided your pain is worth witnessing. This audience had not made that decision. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the door. Told him she would stop inconveniencing him. Her voice didn't shake. Not cold. Cold would have been a performance. Simply factual. The way you state the time of day. She walked out. The doors of Iron Hollow closed behind her, like a period at the end of a sentence she had never been allowed to finish. She was given until sundown to leave the territory. No supplies. One of the kitchen wolves, a woman named Bree, who had never spoken more than 10 words to Sera directly, left a pack at the door before dawn. Food for 3 days. A flint, a compass. No note. Sera picked it up. She did not look back. The neutral territories were not designed for living. They were designed for passing through. Buffer zones between pack claims, unmaintained, unpatrolled, claimed by no one because no one considered them worth claiming. Sera Voss did not teach herself to survive there. She had already survived harder things than geography. What she did in those first months was refuse to become the story Iron Hollow had told about her. The story was she was not strong enough, not worthy enough. The neutral territories, cold and indifferent, and offering nothing to those who expected to be offered things, had no opinion about that story whatsoever. That turned out to be exactly what she needed. She found the old den system in the third week, an abandoned network of tunnels from a pack that had dissolved 2 generations back. Structurally sound, defensible, positioned near a water source that ran through winter. She cleared it in 4 days, reinforced 3 exits, learned which routes held through frost and which didn't, mapped 40 square miles of territory no pack had considered worth mapping. Then she began to find the others. They arrived the way exiled wolves always arrive, separately, quietly, moving like things that had learned not to trust open ground. A she-wolf driven out for refusing a forced bond. 2 brothers from a dissolved border pack. A healer whose gifts had made her pack's war general afraid of her. A tracker expelled for the accuracy of her report. None of them arrived expecting to build something. Sera didn't offer them a speech. She showed them the den system, the water source, the mapped territory, and told them the land didn't care about their story. Neither did she, unless they wanted to tell it. What she cared about was whether they knew how to work. Every one of them stayed. Riva, the healer, turned out to be the most gifted diagnostician Sera had ever encountered. Kept deliberately small in her birth pack because her ability to identify illness before it presented symptoms had made certain wolves uncomfortable. In the neutral territories, it simply kept wolves alive through 2 fever outbreaks. Len, the tracker, could read ground disturbance at a run, in darkness, in snowfall. The brothers Fen and Cal carried between them a combined knowledge of territory law and old pack codes that proved invaluable when neutral territory boundaries were contested. They trained every morning, not the formal drills of a war pack, the deep, practical, improvised training of wolves who had no margin for theory. Back at Iron Hollow, everything Sera had built was becoming visible only through its absence. The Crescent Ridge Alliance, the one she had been preparing before her removal, collapsed within 6 months. The goodwill she had built by understanding what they actually needed, rather than what Iron Hollow wanted to give them, was not transferable. The eastern border dispute with the Ashvale Pack, which she had been quietly de-escalating through back-channel contact for 3 months, began to heat again. Dak's solution was more patrols and a formal territorial warning. The Ashvale Alpha, who was not afraid of force, responded in kind. Marcus, meanwhile, had developed the particular confidence that belongs to advisors who have successfully removed the only person in the room who disagreed with them. He advised with the certainty of a man who no longer experienced friction. A wolf who stops experiencing friction stops being tested. A wolf who stops knowing what he is actually made of. Cain saw all of it. The way you see something you have been choosing not to look at directly, peripherally, incompletely, with the protective blur of a man who has already committed to a version of events that cannot accommodate what he is seeing. The pack was functioning. It was not in the way it had been alive. The Ashvale attack came on a night in deep winter, when Iron Hollow's border patrol was stretched thin by a secondary skirmish in the north. A skirmish that, Cain would understand later, had been deliberately engineered to divide their defensive attention, the kind of tactical coordination that required months of observation. A detailed map of Iron Hollow's patrol patterns, the kind of map that only existed in Iron Hollow's own records, and in the hands of someone who had studied those records carefully and recently. Marcus had been quietly managing Iron Hollow's alliance negotiations with Ashvale for 18 months, managing them in the direction of his own interests, a land arrangement in the Eastern Corridor that would have enriched him and two of his extended bloodlines significantly, not in the direction of Iron Hollow's interests, because for 18 months, no one in that room had asked him to account for the difference. The Ashvale force came in from 3 directions simultaneously. Iron Hollow had prepared for a direct border engagement. They had not prepared for this. Cain fought. He held the center breach alone for 40 minutes. He was still outnumbered. He went down in the courtyard. 4 injuries combined in a way that doesn't announce what it's doing until it has already done it. He was on his knees in the snow when the howls changed. The Ashvale force didn't retreat. They stopped. There is a specific quality to the sound of an assault force when it encounters something it didn't expect and doesn't know how to categorize. Not the sound of fear, the sound of recalculation. They came from the neutral territory sides, 7 wolves, moving in coordinated formation, silent, fast, using the terrain in ways the Ashvale force had never prepared for. Cain looked up from the snow and saw them. He didn't recognize Sera immediately. That was the part that stayed with him. He had spent 2 years looking at her, then 18 months refusing to. Faces change when nobody is watching them. The woman leading those 7 wolves through his courtyard in darkness was not the woman he had told to leave. She was something that woman had become, built differently, moving differently, carrying an authority that had nothing to do with being given a title, and everything to do with having earned a reckoning with what she was actually capable of. She and her wolves took back the East Corridor in 40 minutes. The Ashvale force withdrew before dawn. Riva found Cain still in the courtyard, crouched in front of him, assessed his injuries with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had done this many times without resources. When he asked who she was, she told him, driven out of Crescent Ridge 3 years ago for knowing too much. Sera had found her in the neutral territories. She tied off the wound dressing without looking up and told him to rest. He understood then, completely, with nothing left to soften it. Not just the rejection itself, the entire architecture of it, the pride, the bad counsel, the chosen blindness. Every step he had watched and not watched and refused to name, building toward this night one quiet decision at a time. He had spent 2 years with the wolf the moon goddess had sent him, and he had listened instead to 3 advisors who served his comfort more than his wisdom. He had built this night himself. He found her at the neutral territory border as the light grew. She was standing at the boundary line, the same line she had crossed 18 months ago with 3 days of food and a compass, not looking toward Iron Hollow, simply standing the way she stood at fires, like someone who had found a level and was occupying it. He had 4 wounds and a limp, and the particular look of a man who had been delivered a truth he had spent a long time building the conditions for without understanding it. She looked at him for a long moment, at the wounds, at the limp, at the snow still on his knees from the courtyard, at the pack house behind him, where the lights were coming on as Iron Hollow organized itself into the shape of something that had survived the night. Then she told him the truth. She said she had saved Iron Hollow because the wolves of that pack were not the decision he had made about her. They were not responsible for it. She would not make them pay for it. Then she said the part he needed to hear most. She was not coming back. The rejection stood, not because of what he had said, because of who he had shown her he was willing to listen to, and who he had shown her he was willing to stop hearing. She looked at him one last moment, told him she hoped he built something worth what that night had cost him. Then she turned and walked back into the neutral territories. She did not look back. 3 weeks later, delegations arrived at her border. Not from Iron Hollow, from Crescent Ridge, from the Northern Pack, from dissolved border settlements, from packs that had heard what happened and, more specifically, who had come out of the neutral territories to answer it. They didn't come to offer Sera a territory. They came to ask if she was building one. She looked at the 7 wolves at her boundary line. She thought about Elder Soren's prophecy. The mate the Alpha rejects will be the one his pack cannot survive without. He had said Iron Hollow. He had not said only Iron Hollow. She told them to come in, said there was work. Iron Hollow sent a formal delegation 6 months later, not to reclaim her, to request an alliance. Elder Soren, who had walked out of the rejection ceremony and straight into the neutral territories 3 days later, where he had been ever since, received the delegation at the boundary, sent them back with a written response. 3 sentences. Alpha Voss would consider the alliance request. She had one condition. Cain Ashford would appear before both packs and state, in the same voice and the same public forum he had used to speak his rejection, exactly what Iron Hollow had lost the night it told its fated Luna she was not enough. No Alpha in the Northern Territories had ever done what he did next. He came. He stood before both packs and said it plainly. Iron Hollow had told its fated Luna she would never be welcome. Iron Hollow was wrong. The pack had suffered for it. He had caused it. He was saying it publicly because it had been done publicly, and debts of that kind are not settled in private. Sera did not attend. She did not need to. And when the ceremonies were done, in the territory that had no old name because it had not existed before she built it, Sera Voss sat at the head of her own pack table, in the seat that had always been hers, in the room no one had ever told her she could not enter. She had her work to do. His fated mate stood before every wolf who had ever pledged their life to his pack. He looked her in the eye and told her she would never be Luna. Years later, when his pack was bleeding in the snow, she was the only one who could save it. She saved them anyway. Now the question is yours. If that had been you standing in that great hall, if those words had been said to you in front of everyone, loud enough for the children to remember, would you have done what Sera did? Or would you have let Iron Hollow burn? Leave your answer in the comments. If this story stayed with you, you know what to do. I'm Pauline. I'll see you in the next one.